business. Now, it's not growing at the same rate it was a year ago, probably half,
Right.
but we'll see somewhere between 15 and 20.
Business and residential
growth.
both not growing equally, or?
Residential's definitely on the decline. That's just a cash flow engine for us. The cloud is the future. That had been growing at 30, 35%. Right now, it's probably growing somewhere between 18 and 20%.
That's a haircut.
Still a great business.
Yeah.
And it's going to continue to be critical because those multimodal communications, you interact with companies now 24/7 anywhere around the world, whether it's voice, video, you want support, you want commerce. That's just the way of the future. Every industry, every vertical is going to need this. And that's why we got to invest now to create the differentiation.
For our audience and those who are unaware, Ericsson acquired Vonage just last year in July, right, for $6.2 billion. My question is, talk to us about the AGM that's coming up next week for Ericsson. Where does Vonage fit into the company's, the company enterprise 5G market? Where does that fit into the company's future plans?
Ericsson's an amazing company. They're driving almost half of the traffic in the 5G space outside of China around the world. I mean, this is a technology leader. They see an opportunity to take our communication APIs, that's really the cloud-based bits of code that allows every enterprise to interact with customers, whether it's telling you your coffee's ready or having a telemedicine environment. What they see is now we can take the network, what's in the network that we can expose to these APIs. So we can create better quality of service. We can create location. We can create silent authentication. Now, instead of you just having to type in 6 digits, it'll know who you are by traversing the information that's in the network. We're going to create a whole new generation of APIs based on the network. That's a first mover. And if you were at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona a couple of weeks ago, this was a big theme in the industry. This is going to drive that telco space for the next 5-10 years.
API, you mean application programming interface, right?
What they are is, that's exactly what it is, Carol. And they're bits of code that allows enterprises like, chocolate companies, ride-sharing companies, telemedicine companies to embed video, voice, messaging into their applications to reach anyone around the world who has a smartphone. And the smartphones, what, 5 billion of them?
Yeah, there's a few out there.
Yeah.
Hey,
just a few.
I want to ask you, because you were talking about geography, you are global.
Absolutely.
So when you look around the world, it's great when we have somebody like you in studio. When we are at this moment of, we talk recession, we talk hard landing, we talk soft landing, certainly here in the US, but we're looking around the world. Where are the stronger markets geographically? Where are the weaker markets?
Sure. In the tactical time frame, I still like the U.S. It's strong.
Because it's growing still.
It's definitely growing. Our businesses are growing in all geographies right now.
Where
not at the same rate.
Okay, where is it not growing that strongly?
I think if you thought about it
China?
in terms of Europe and China are probably the most under pressure for sure.
Would you think that has something to do with data privacy concerns and piracy issues and all the things that are going on with China and the U.S.? Yeah, it's China geo. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Where Europe, I think there's been more pressure because of the inflation, the Ukraine-Russia war. That's put some pressure on it. Still growing. India's strong.
Yeah.
Africa's reasonably strong. Parts of Asia, good. But it's all temporary. There's definitely kind of a dislocation that's occurring, but it's going to turn, and we have to be prepared for that turn.
Even China and geopolitically, we certainly have lots of conversations around this table about that it's a different relationship with China going forward, certainly between the United States and China.
It seems that way, but we have a good, we're going to continue to deliver messages for multinationals wherever they need to get that multimodal communication out there. It seems like a problem, but again, 30, 40 years, things change rather quickly. 2 years from now, I think things could be very different than they are today. I'm an optimist for sure. But I also plan.
I'm an optimist too, but
I cover emerging markets, and I'm a New York Jet fan, so I'm an ever optimist.
But I manage my OpEx, and I make sure I keep the headcount under control.
Can we have geopolitical pressures between the U.S. and China, and yet, as a global company, you guys still have a lot of business in China or with China?
We have a reasonable presence in China.
But you can stay that course, even though there can be that disconnect between.
You never know. Okay. So you never know. But what we have to do is continue to grow, continue to deliver the value to our multinationals, the digital natives around the planet, and continue to create the differentiated product solutions that they need.
Well, let's bring it back.
Carry the day.
Let's bring it back closer to home. There, let's talk about the regional U.S. banking system and SVB in particular. Are there any lasting damage that you see? Maybe not to your company, but to your clients that this is going to leave them with. Do you potentially see some of these venture and early stage growth companies going under because of this?
Well, I don't think the bank issue, particularly that one, is huge. I think what they have to do is contain it now, and I think they're working to make sure they do that. I think the bigger pressure is companies that were able to survive on a very marginal business model because money was so cheap. They need to create business models that are more cash flow positive and with less burn. And I think because of the market, entrepreneurs will adjust.
So Rory, just 10 seconds. So does that mean because of some of the cracks you may be seeing with a smaller competitor or something, there's an acquisition move potentially as a result, real quickly?
There's no question. There's absolutely. You need to take advantage.
For you guys specifically.
Yes, and there's always an opportunity. These market issues and volatility, they're opportunities. Find them. The market will change and it will return. And it will return fast and strong.
Well, you were fun with us, and we were a little bit of a rapid fire, but we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Rory Reed, Chief Executive Officer at Vonage, here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. All right, let's get another check on world and national news. We head to Nancy Lyons. She's in our 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Carol. As you've been hearing here on Bloomberg, the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates another 0.25%, and there may be more hikes to come. It's a clear sign that the Fed is confident its efforts to stem inflation will not deepen the recent banking woes. Well, it's been a tough day for the CEO of drug maker Moderna, Stephen Bancel, who was grilled on Capitol Hill by lawmakers on the Senate Health Committee. They wanted to know why the company is raising the price of a dose of COVID-19 vaccine from $36 to $130.
Bancel, who came here from France, said the cost of distributing the vaccine will rise substantially now that the pandemic has receded.
In the pandemic market, we had one customer, the U.S. government. We only had to deliver to 3 CDC warehouses. We're going to have to manage logistics to deliver to 60,000 pharmacies, doctor's office, and hospital. We're expecting a 90%, 90, reduction in demand.
Bancel said Moderna will try to make the vaccine available to the uninsured at no charge by reaching out to community hospitals and even to homeless shelters. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
It was the issue of rail safety that took center stage today at the Senate Transportation Committee. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine says residents in East Palestine, Ohio, are still trying to get their lives back together after a Norfolk Southern train filled with toxic chemicals derailed in their community.
Norfolk Southern has an obligation to restore this community. It was their train, their tracks, their accident. They're responsible for this tragedy.
DeWine says while soil and air tests indicate everything is safe, he says the fear remains. The Manhattan grand jury that's been meeting regarding Donald Trump's so-called hush money case was told not to come in today, but members of the jury were told to be on standby for tomorrow. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. Stocks lower today, and this update brought to you by Innovation Refunds. This is your daily reminder from Innovation Refunds to see if your small to medium-sized business qualifies for a payroll tax refund. If your business was impacted by the pandemic, this is your opportunity to take control of your business's future. Learn more at getrefunds.com. A down day for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ, a 1.6% drop for all three today, with the S&P down 66 points. The Dow was down 530, NASDAQ down 190. The stock market sold off after Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's remarks rattled bank shares, and Jay Powell dashed hopes that the Federal Reserve would cut rates this year. The Fed chair began his news conference with comments about turmoil in the banking industry.
In the past 2 weeks, serious difficulties at a small number of banks have emerged. History has shown that isolated banking problems, if left unaddressed, can undermine confidence in healthy banks and threaten the ability of the banking system as a whole to play its vital role in supporting the savings and credit needs of households and businesses.
Powell's comments carried live here on Bloomberg Radio. 10-year yield 3.44%, with a 2-year 3.95%. Spot gold up 1.4%, $19.67 the ounce, and crude $69.96 a barrel, up by 0.4%. After earnings after hours, KB Home, it narrowed its housing revenue forecast for the full year. The stock, though, up 2.5%. Chewy down 1.6% in extended trading after projecting that annual net sales growth will decelerate. The SEC is suing crypto mogul Justin Sun for allegedly violating securities rules, and says 8 celebrities, including Lindsay Lohan and the artist known as Soulja Boy, illegally touted tokens. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. I don't know if you noticed, but if you live out in the San Francisco Bay Area, well aware of the historic storm that rattled the city. They had hurricane-force gusts. California, Damien, we know, one of the regions in the world that has seen its shares of droughts, flooding, fires, and other erratic climate-related conditions.
Wow.
Right,
And we've had flooding in New Zealand. We've seen stuff in Malawi. We've seen, the whole world is feeling it.
Yeah, and there's a UN report out this week summarizing 5 years of research, noting that damage that's been done, and perhaps maybe, I don't know, how close we are to a point of no return. I'm being a little dramatic here. So let's get to it with our own Eric Roston. He's a sustainability editor here at Bloomberg News. He's here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Tell us about this UN report.
This was it's called the Synthesis Report by the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is the group that for more than 30 years now has a couple times a decade, once or twice a decade, just assessed everything we know about climate change and put it between two covers. And it's this isn't said much, but it is a remarkable thing. There is no other area of science in the hundreds of years we've had professional science that codifies what we know and updates it every few years.
And what did they find?
As one might expect, the news is not great.
Okay.
But I think listeners have seen headlines. Listeners have a sense of the problem, have a sense of the scale of the problem. And I wanted to tease out a couple things that are in the report, but because of they're very small, they need to be teased out, and I think there's 3 things. One is we're on a clock. I've been covering this a long time. When I started 20 years ago, it had already been 20 years when scientists were saying, by 2020 or so, you really want to get on top of this.
Right.
When I started, it was 20 years, you really want to get on top of this. The big Copenhagen fiasco in 2009,
right.
International conference. They're you got probably 10 years to get on top of this. And it's it's here, it's now. We got to get on top of this, which brings us to point 2. We absolutely can be on top of this, increasing, accelerating parts of the economy are on top of this, providing the solutions that we need to address this problem. Solar and wind and battery they're old stories. Those are mature companies providing mature products. That is just an execution problem now. Like we know how to.
So it's here. Just use it.
It's here. Yeah, it's just
put it to work.
Like part of it is just scaling these companies and industries that have mature technologies. And part of it, the next wave of investment we're seeing are in like completely gee whiz, super niche, very helpful technologies that that just are going to help the job done. They get the job done. We can make steel with hydrogen now.
Right.
There's like a lot of things. There are a world of opportunities to make money, and people are doing it to the extent that if you're not doing it, you're going to be late.
Eric, what did the report reveal about China and its role as the largest emitter of greenhouse gases?
It's a good question, and the basic answer is because of the nature of this report, which is like it is written. 200 nations and all of the scientists sit in a room for a week and they go line by line agreeing to every word of the summary of this report. So this is not the place to answer that question. The answer to that question, however, is in most other places, right? China, on an annual basis, is by far the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, like something like 30%. Yeah. The United States, on a historical basis, is by far the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and the leadership, for better or for worse, displayed by these two nations really define the global problem and the global solution set. Every nation, now that the U.S. is in the ball game after the Inflation Reduction Act, again, like. I've been covering science for 20 years, and to me, the most exciting story now is the technology deployment race.
So, okay, I want to go back to that in a moment, but I want to talk about this, this 1.5, Celsius of global warming that we've been obsessed with.
Yes.
We haven't done it yet, but we're close. Or are we?
We are close.
How does that represent a point of no return in some way?
There is always a point of return.
Okay.
There is always, because of the emergence...
let's just go burn some more coal.
No, stop that. So,
that is called moral hazard.
But why is there always a point of return?
The point of return gets exponentially more difficult every year that goes by.
Okay.
But the fact is that, because we know how to replace the fossil fuels, and because there's technologies and methods to take carbon down out of the atmosphere, we're building another thermostat for ourselves. And again, very difficult, very expensive, but at least theoretically, take a lot of work, take a lot of money, but there is no such thing as too late.
Eric, I think I read a piece of yours not long ago about the ability of plants and trees to absorb more carbon. So it's not all floods, deaths, and displacement and clean energy now, is it?
That's 100% true. And something that we're focused on a lot here is something that goes by the wonky name of biodiversity. And biodiversity, ultimately, it means what it sounds, even though it sounds a little wonky. But nature is, the foundation of the entire economy and human settlements. But also, biodiversity and nature do us an enormous favor. The oceans and the land draw down 54% of the CO2 that we put up every year.
Which is amazing.
We want to make sure that the oceans and the land and the biodiversity are healthy because they are giving us an enormous subsidy.
At no cost, right? I mean,
And-
right?
right.
It just happens.
Yeah.
As long as we
It
take
just
care
because
of
that's
it.
just how the Earth works.
What? Do you got a last
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, look, the past few years have brought concerns that land carbon sink is kind of taking place, right? I mean, that's really been the big concern. I mean, look, I think we have to focus more on this issue is what I think.
Listen, you're preaching to the choir in a big way. But I love the optimism as well. That makes me feel a lot better. Eric Roston, thank you. So appreciate it. Sustainability editor at Bloomberg News. Find him on Twitter at eRoston, Roston. Check out his writings and reporting on Bloomberg.com and always on the Bloomberg Terminal. This is Bloomberg Radio.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
It's 4:53 on Wall Street from Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. The job hiring platform Indeed will cut about 2,200 positions, roughly 15% of its total workforce, joining a number of other big tech companies, including Amazon and Meta Platforms, in reducing workers amid economic uncertainty. Big day for GameStop shares. They surged 35.2% today after earnings, and they reported a surprise profit in the fourth quarter. They also beat analyst estimates for revenue. Nike also out with earnings. That stock lower today by 4.9%. PacWest Bancorp has secured $1.4 billion in cash from a financing facility from Atlas SP Partners and abandoned a separate push to raise capital after its customers pulled more than 20% of total deposits this year. Allison Williams is a senior bank analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence.
Again, I think we have a situation where one particular bank is coming out and talking about, that they've stabilized things, but people are focusing on the deposits, the pace of those deposits, and again, worried about what's happening at other banks.
Atlas SP is an investment firm that is led by former Credit Suisse executive Jay Kim. The online pet food retailer Chewy down 2% in extended trading after projecting that annual net sales growth will decelerate. Bitcoin today down 2.7% on a down day for the rest of the market. Those are some of the company stories that we're following for you this hour. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Wednesday. Tim, as you know, is on leave, along with myself as Damian Sassower. We're going to get more Business Week in just a moment, but first up, let's get another update on world and national news. Off to D.C. we go, and Nancy Lyons. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Carol. Lawmakers are looking at ways to prevent another toxic derailment like the one that happened in East Palestine, Ohio. Alan Shaw is the CEO of Norfolk Southern.
We support legislative efforts that use science and data to enhance the safety of the freight rail industry.
Shaw, in testimony today before the Senate Transportation Committee, did not fully endorse the bipartisan bill under consideration that would increase fines for safety violations and require larger crews. The CEO of Moderna, the company that gave us the mRNA version of the COVID-19 vaccine, is defending his company's decision to charge as much as $130 now for a dose of the vaccine. Stefan Bancel was questioned about that decision by Senator Bernie Sanders, who chairs the Senate Health Committee.
We used to have 10 doses in each vial. Now we're going to have every vial will have a different dose. This is not the same.
I understand it, but quadrupling the price is huge, and I would hope very much that you will reconsider that decision. It's going to cost the taxpayers of this country billions of dollars. That's something you can do.
The volume we had during the pandemic gave us economies of scale we won't have anymore.
Bancel says his company has repaid the government for its investment and is setting a fair private market rate for its vaccine. A major overhaul is coming to the system that offers a new lease on life to tens of thousands of Americans.
The Biden administration plans to revamp the U.S. organ transplant system and break up the nonprofit that's had near complete control over it for 37 years. The Washington Post reports other organizations will be invited to take over the responsibilities of the United Network for Organ Sharing. Close to 104,000 Americans are on organ waiting lists across the country. It's estimated 22 of them die every day waiting for those life-saving organs. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now back to you, Carol and Damian.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. More Business Week in just a moment, but we do want to mention that March is Women's History Month. Every day this month, we're celebrating significant moments in women's history. So let's get your installment for this Wednesday, March 22nd. For that, here's Bloomberg's Lisa Mateo.
On this day in women's history in 1638, Anne Hutchinson is expelled from the Massachusetts Bay Colony for her religious teachings. She was the first female defendant in a Massachusetts court. Hutchinson, her husband, and their 15 children arrived in Boston in 1634 and were devoted followers of the Puritan preacher John Cotton. She held prayer meetings for women in her home, but she soon stirred controversy when men began to attend. She also drew attention for criticizing the teachings of the Puritan ministers. Hutchinson Erickson and her family left Massachusetts Bay for Rhode Island. After her husband died, she moved to New Amsterdam, where she was killed in an Indian raid. That's today in women's history. I'm Lisa Mateo, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Lisa, thank you so much. Carol Master along with Damian Sassauer on this Fed Wednesday. So here we are a few hours after that Fed decision. What are you thinking? Top of mind?
I got to tell you, I can't take my eyes off the dollar here. I mean, to me, it's just an ongoing situation. The fact that the dollar has been falling in the face of all this volatility, it just doesn't normally do that, Carol. So in a risk-off environment, the dollar should be rallying. It's
should be
not.
A safe haven of some sort, right?
It should be, exactly right. And in fact, what we saw is a lot of the carry trades, a lot of people, basically get long a high-yielding currency and short another one. They try to make that return. We saw a lot of those trades roll off, and still we saw the dollar rally. So it just means to me that there might be some legs left to this bearish dollar move.
All right, well, certainly an interesting day. We got that Fed decision. Markets, stocks certainly finishing really at their lows of the session, if you will, and we saw yields staying down also. So interesting, lots to talk about. Curious, Damian, what the follow-through is ultimately tomorrow.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, we got to look at spreads first and foremost, right? I mean, the banking sector and any sort of, ancillary impact on it. And so, I'm wholly focused on credit spreads here. If we don't see them continue to narrow, because they're still pretty wide,
right,
then I don't think we're out of the woods yet.
All right, don't go anywhere. Damian and I are coming back on the other side of this break. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master, Damian Sassauer. We are Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
And a big hello, everybody. Bloomberg Business Week continuing on this Wednesday, live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals. My host, Tim Stenivek, he is on leave. Still with us is Damian Sassauer, Bloomberg Intelligence Chief Emerging Markets Credit Strategist. And I know you are excited about this roundtable that's coming up.
I am indeed. No one like talking to Jess and Liz when it comes to all things macro and markets.
We'll see what they have to say now that we're a few hours out from that Fed decision. Also, those comments from Janet Yellen certainly impacting the trade. Also, we're going to talk about understanding being single and living alone in the Black middle class. It is the subject of a new book, why this needs to be on your radar. And then, Damian, I know you love this story, why sexting chatbots are dumping their human lovers.
I love that story.
We are definitely living in a different world. All right, don't go anywhere. Right now, though, folks, let's get a check on that trade, how things ended up, and your top business stories. Here's Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much for that intro. Here's what's going on. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all moved lower today. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg with the S&P down 65, drop there of 1.6%. The Dow also down 1.6%. NASDAQ also lower today by 1.6%. We had the 10-year at 3.43%, the 2-year 3.93%, and right now we have got spot gold up 1.6%, 1970 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude 70.90 a barrel, up by 1.8%. You heard it live here on Bloomberg Radio. The Federal Reserve is raising rates again to quash inflation, though the U.S. banking system is reeling from a lack of confidence. And with more, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Fed officials opted for another mild quarter-point rate increase following last year's jumbo moves to fight inflation, even after this month's bank runs. Fed Chair Jerome Powell said the decision to tighten was a close call, and officials did indeed consider a pause. How about rate cuts? Don't bet on it this year, Powell says. Fed officials described the U.S. banking system as sound and resilient, but warned the crisis could weigh on the economy. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Shares of KB Home higher after hours. It did narrow its housing revenue forecast for the full year, but KB Home also reported first quarter deliveries at 2,788. Estimates were for 2,678. Chewy down 1.6% in extended trading after projecting that annual net sales growth will decelerate. Again, recapping here, a sell-off on Wall Street. You check the GIP chart for the S&P 500 index. We ended at lows of the day. The S&P down 65 points today, a drop there of 1.65%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Yeah, that's a perfect lead into today in the environment. So, and I gotta say, Damien, the lead up to the Fed meeting today was, I feel like, one of the most speculated about, debated. We laid out all the different scenarios. There was just such a deep, thick conversation. A lot was said heading up to it,
and there were so many different ways to go. I mean, it could have been a pause with a hawkish dot plot. I mean, it was the 25th bit pike. It could have been 50. I mean, you just didn't know where to go. It was really interesting to see play out.
Yeah, all over the place. Well, the decision that we did get largely expected, as you know from our team, the Fed raising interest rates a 0.25 percentage point, signaling it's not finished hiking despite the risk of exacerbating a bank crisis that has definitely roiled global markets. So let's get a roundup of the decision, market reaction. We also said Janet Yellen talking about banking. My sometimes co-host here on radio, back with us, Bloomberg News Deputy Team Leader for U.S. Equities, Jess Metton. She's in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Also back with us, Liz McCormick, Chief Correspondent for Global Macro Markets via Zoom in New York City. So I do want to start with you, Liz, because I do feel like we've been so focused about this Fed decision. It felt like Jay Powell was doing pretty well. We'll talk about Janet Yellen in a moment. What was your key takeaways here in terms of what he shared? Although it did feel like there were a lot more questions in some of his tones and answers.
Yeah, I think relative to maybe he got the memo that he creates more volatility in his press conferences, that he didn't kind of blow things up, as far as sending things too crazy. So I think in that purpose, you're right. He did a good job. I mean, the markets, like I was reading some of the notes, which are always so great after a Fed meeting, someone was saying, listen, I'm going to let you know what I think Powell said, and what the markets heard is another story, like markets kind of do what they're going to do. But I think he did a good job of trying to stick to his knitting of what they wanted to do. And, I think it was our folks who asked him, kind of what about rate cuts, and he kind of dodged that and came back a little later. So yeah, I think it was a better showing for him as far as not creating too much volatility.
Liz, the Fed replaced, quote, ongoing increases with, quote, anticipate some additional policy firming may be appropriate. And in the presser, I know that he was asked, why policy firming? Do you mean rate hikes, or additional rate hikes, or QT? And so what do you think would need to occur for large banks to actually call on the Fed for an end to QT at this point?
Well, he seems really hard on that point, and like you brought up, that he keeps saying QT is a separate animal, right? Because he was asked also, you're adding with these special liquidity programs, not just the normal discount window, but with the programs you started, liquidity on one hand, is that going counter to the QT? And he said, no, these are separate things. QT is running along kind of swimmingly, basically, and we don't see that as a problem. And so he seems to not want to go there, even though you're right, there are people saying, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense, so that at least they should slow down QT. I think that all might be a moot point if in the end they do start cutting later this year. I'm not predicting, but then usually they don't like their levers going in opposite directions, right? Tightening from QT and cutting actual rates.
I mean, Liz, someone has to explain to me the difference between permanent open market operations and temporary open, POMO versus TOMO. Now, I mean, Jess, let's switch gears here. Let's look at the equity market. I mean, we know low vol and profitability. Those are the factors that have been driving equity market returns in recent, weeks. Do you expect this to continue now after today's presser?
Well, that's the big thing, especially when you're looking at technology, unfortunately, turning around, giving up a lot of those gains, and then also looking at where, say, people like to obviously look where Apple was down almost 1%, but the NY FANG index for this quarter is actually up more than 30%, so that obviously encompasses Apple, Microsoft, some of these older type tech names. And coming into right after that statement and then the summary of economic projections,
stocks rallied.
Exactly. And as you know, Carol, when you're having these conversations with sources, how the direction of those conversations can change so quickly. So that first half hour, hey, we might be in for a pause soon. Could potentially be May. This is going to be great. We hear from Powell. He even suggested, as you were talking about, Damien, in one of the Q&As, talking about, hey, we were thinking about a potential pause there in recent days, changed course. But then also the big thing came up with my sources, really with Janet Yellen and the statement she made, and the fact that she was asked about basically FDI insurance, was that being contemplated and being expanded at all to depositors? And her response was, in short, that it was not something they were looking at or considering. In some ways, you could argue that maybe her intent was maybe not to rattle markets and trying to say that, hey, we don't necessarily need it. It hasn't gotten to that point. Markets started reading it differently, and you could see that overall in the equity market when you're looking at banks, when you're looking at REITs, and the
banks
sell-off that was
just
happening.
sold off in a
Absolutely.
big way. Lots of underperformance there. Well, you know, Liz, come on back in terms of Jay Powell doing that delicate dance, if you will, between the Fed's fight against inflation, and then also looking at financial market conditions and knowing what's going on with the banking sector and knowing and having an understanding that there still may be more shoes to drop.
Right, and it's funny because Jess brought up what I was going to say, that it's almost like yelling kneecapped Powell because he's talking, and then, whew, there goes the stock market. Because
There's your headline on a story for tomorrow. But go ahead.
Yeah, okay, good idea, Carol. Yeah, and it's so funny, like, you know, Powell in his prepared statement had said the banking sector is sound and deposits are sound, and you know, someone else was saying, first of all, whenever you have to say that, it's not too sound. You know, it's like you're telling your kid everything's okay and it's really not. But I think the market's still concerned about the banking sector, right? And like you guys said, the banking stocks got killed. And I just think, and Powell did say, like, I think what's making this difficult too is there's so much uncertainty. Even Powell said, listen, we know, you know, there's some tightening from the credit standards getting tighter.